Welcome to Wisdom Trek. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, and we are on day 2685 of our trek. The purpose of Wisdom Trek is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, and to boldly grow where few have chosen to grow before. In today's Wisdom Nugget, it's titled, Unyielding Rebellion Meets Unwavering Faithfulness. It's a trek through Psalm 78, verses 40 through 55. Today we continue our crucial and comprehensive trek through Psalm 78 from the New Living Translation. In our journey through Psalm 78, Asaph, the psalmist, has been delivering a solemn history lesson to future generations. We've seen Israel's early failure, the Ephraimites turning away from battle because they forgot God's covenant. We then witnessed God's amazing, yet sometimes punitive provision in the wilderness, water from rocks, manna, and quail, following by the judgment of the greedy, unbelieving hearts. Most recently, in verses 32 through 39, we reflected on Israel's superficial repentance, their deceitful hearts, and God's incredible, enduring compassion despite their persistent unfaithfulness, remembering that they are merely mortal. Now, as we move on to this next chapter in Israel's history, Asaph intensifies his account of Israel's repeated rebellion and their blatant provocation of God, even while recounting a truly devastating plagues that God unleashed on Egypt for their sake. This section powerfully contrasts Israel's hard-heartedness and forgetfulness with God's unwavering faithfulness. Also, his overwhelming power and his meticulous fulfillment of his covenant promise to bring them into the promised land. It reveals a pattern of human failure that, tragically, even divine miracles often fail to break. So let's begin to absorb the humbling lesson of Israel's persistent provocation and God's relentless, powerful love. First, let's read verses 40 through 42. Oh, how often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved his heart in the dry wasteland. Again and again they tested God's patience and put the Holy One of Israel to the test. They did not remember his power or the day when he rescued them from their enemies. Asaph returns to the agonizing theme of Israel's persistent unfaithfulness, summarizing their wilderness behavior. Oh, how often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved his heart in the dry wasteland. The exclamation, oh, how often, the Hebrew word kamah, emphasizes the frequency and multitude of their acts of rebellion. This wasn't just a single incident. It was a continuous pattern throughout the 40 years in the desert. Their actions grieved his heart. Literally, it pained him and vexed him. A powerful metaphor for attributing human emotion to God, showing God's deep sorrow and distress over a constant defiance. The dry wasteland underscores the context of the utter dependence upon God, making their rebellion even more egregious. Their rebellion was an act of testing of God again and again. It says, again and again they tested God's patience and put the Holy One of Israel to the test. The repetition again and again reinforces the relentless nature of their provocation. To test God's patience, the Hebrew word nashah, means to push his limits, to challenge his forbearance, and see how far they could go before he would respond. To put the Holy One of Israel to the test, invoking a divine title emphasizing God's absolute moral purity and separateness. To test the Holy One is a profound act of spiritual insolence. This echoes the earlier testing of gods regarding food in verses 18 and 19, showing a pattern to their behavior. The fundamental reason for the persistent rebellion was profound spiritual amnesia. They did not remember his power or the day that he rescued them from their enemies. Despite having witnessed incredible demonstrations of God's power, that is, his might, and his dramatic acts of rescue from his enemies, particularly the Exodus and the defeat of the Egyptians, they simply did not remember. This isn't just a failure of memory, it's a failure of heart to retain and internalize the lessons of God's faithfulness. This spiritual forgetfulness was the root cause of a continuous cycle of testing and rebellion. This opening sets a somber tone. Remember how quickly the human hearts can forget even the most miraculous displays of divine power. Now Asaph meticulously recounts the very power and rescue that they forgot, detailing God's devastating plagues against Egypt, demonstrating his absolute sovereignty over all creation. So let's read Psalm 78 verses 43 through 51. They forgot all the miracles he did in Egypt, in the region of Zoan. For he turned the rivers into blood, so that no one could drink from the streams. He sent swarms of flies to consume them, and frogs to ruin their land. He gave their crops to the caterpillars, locusts devoured their harvest. He destroyed the grapevines with their hail and shattered their sycamore fig trees with frost. He struck their cattle with the plague and their flocks with the disease. He unleashed a fierce anger against them, sending every kind of disaster. He set loose his destroying angels. He did not spare the Egyptian lives, but killed the firstborn of every family. He struck the firstborn of all the families of Egypt, the flower of their youth in the land of Ham. Asaph continues to underscore Israel's forgetfulness by detailing the very miracles that they failed to remember. He recounts God's devastating power and demonstration against Egypt. They forgot all the miracles he did in Egypt, in the region of Zoan. These miracles were undeniable, performed in the region of Zoan, a prominent city, ensuring public witness. He then lists several of the 10 plagues demonstrating God's comprehensive power over nature, life, and the gods of Egypt. First he lists, "For he turned the rivers into blood. No one could drink from the streams." This comes from Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 through 25, a direct assault on the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, and its associated deities. Then he sent swarms of flies to consume them and frogs to ruin the land. This is Exodus chapter 8, verses 1 through 15, and chapter 8, verses 20 through 32. See the overwhelming infestation that brought misery and chaos, challenging the god of fertility and the god of the Nile. Then he gave their crops to the caterpillars. Locusts devoured their harvest. Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 through 20. Complete destruction of their food supply, demonstrating God's power over their agricultural life, essential for an agrarian society. Next, he destroyed their grapevines with hail and shattered their sycamore fig trees with frost. Exodus 9, verses 13 through 35. Devastation of the fruit-bearing trees and vineyards, striking to their economic prosperity and the joy of their harvest. Frost here likely refers to severe cold associated with the hail, unusual for Egypt. Next, he struck their cattle with the plague and their flocks with disease. Exodus chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. A plague upon the livestock is a direct hit on their economy and a challenge to their animal deities. Then he unleashed his fierce anger against them, sending every kind of disaster. He set loose his destroying angels. This summarizes the culmination effects of the plagues, stemming from God's fierce anger against the Egyptians' oppression and stubbornness. Destroying angels, from Exodus chapter 12, verse 23, refers to the divine agents carrying out God's judgment. The climax of the plagues, in Exodus chapter 12, verses 29 through 30, he did not spare the Egyptian lives, but killed the firstborn of every family. He struck the firstborn of all the families of Egypt, the flower of the youth in the land of Ham. This is the ultimate devastating blow, striking at the heart of every Egyptian family, from royalty to the lowest servant. Now the land of Ham is a poetic reference to Egypt. The final plague broke Pharaoh's will and secured Israel's release, making it a supreme demonstration of God's power and his commitment to his covenant people. Asaph's detailed recounting of these plagues serves as a powerful reminder of God's absolute power over life and death, over nature, and the affairs of nations. These were wonders performed in the sight of their ancestors, undeniable proofs of God's sovereignty and his saving power. The striking irony, which Asaph emphasizes repeatedly, is that despite witnessing these unimaginable displays of divine might for their deliverance, Israel continually rebelled and forgot. Now, after recounting God's powerful acts of judgment on Egypt for Israel's sake, Asaph pivots to God's faithful leadership of his people into the promised inheritance. Let's finish up by reading verses 52 through 55. But he led his own people like sheep through the wilderness. He guided them safely, and their enemies drowned in the sea. He brought them to his holy land, to the mountainous region that he had won with his strong right hand. He drove out the nations before them, and gave their land to Israel as a special inheritance. He divided up the land among the tribes of Israel, and settled the people in their home. In stark contrast to the judgment on Egypt, God's steadfast faithfulness to Israel is highlighted. But he led his own people like sheep through the wilderness. He guided them safely, and their enemies drowned in the sea. The but here signifies a shift of a judgment to salvation. God is depicted as a tender shepherd leading his own people, his chosen flock, through the dangerous wilderness. He guided them safely, ensuring their protection amidst peril, a comfort for those who were lost, as Asaph did in Psalm 77. And their enemies, the very ones who opposed them, drowned in the sea, referring to the Red Sea, a final, destructive act of deliverance and judgment against their pursuers. God's faithfulness culminated in bringing them to their inheritance. He brought them to the Holy Land, to this mountainous region that he had won with his strong right hand. God led them directly to his Holy Land, the land that he had promised Abraham. He personally won this mountainous region, that is Canaan, known for its rugged terrain, with his strong right hand, again emphasizing his immense power and direct intervention in conquering the land for them. This was not human conquest alone, but God's decisive act. The final acts of God's faithfulness were the disposition of the previous inhabitants and a permanent settlement of Israel. He drove out the nations before them and gave their land to Israel as a special inheritance. He divided up the land among the tribes of Israel and settled his people in their homes. God drove out the nations, that is, the Canaanite people, to make way for his people. He bestowed the land upon Israel as their special inheritance, the Hebrew word nahala, a permanent divinely given possession. And to ensure order and security, he divided up the land among the tribes of Israel, establishing their permanent dwelling and their future generations. He literally settled his people into their homes, providing stability and prolonging to the generations of wandering and slavery. Psalm 78 verses 40 through 55 is a powerful testament of God's unparalleled might and his righteous judgment against those who defy him, as well as their unwavering faithfulness in leading his people through impossible circumstances to the promised inheritance, despite their persistent rebellion and forgetfulness. So what profound wisdom can we draw from these verses for our wisdom trek today? Well, firstly, Israel's repeated rebellion and testing of God, even after witnessing overwhelming miracles, serves as a sobering warning. It reminds us of the danger of persistent unbelief and spiritual amnesia, which can grieve God's heart and lead to severe consequences. Secondly, the detailed account of the plagues of Egypt powerfully demonstrates God's absolute sovereignty over all creation, over life and death, and over the affairs of all nations. Our God is the one who can command the very elements and defeat the mightiest oppressors. Thirdly, the contrast between God's judgment on Egypt and his tender leadership of Israel, like sheep, through the wilderness, highlights his profound covenant faithfulness and his distinction between those who defy him and those who are his people. And finally, even when we fail, God remains committed to his promise. He faithfully led Israel into the promised inheritance, driving out their enemies and settling them securely. This reminds us that God is always faithful to his word, even if our journey is marked with personal failures. Our hope rests in his faithfulness, not in our own. Let us commit to remembering God's mighty works, trusting in his sovereign power, and living in grateful obedience, so that we may not repeat the tragic patterns of forgetting the Lord's unparalleled power and boundless grace. Thank you for joining me for this impactful trek through Psalm 78, verses 40 through 55. I trust that this exploration of unyielding rebellion and unwavering faithfulness has resonated with your own journey and has deepened your appreciation for God's power and patience. Join me the next time when we continue to seek out and apply the timeless truths of God's Word. And until then, keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and create a great day every day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day. I'll see you next time for more daily wisdom.